It's 1968 and British truck manufacturers rule their home market. ERF, Atkinson, Foden, AEC, these are the names that dominate British roads. Fast forward to 1988 and most of them are gone, dead, bankrupt. What happened? A Swedish truck called the Scania 110 happened. In 1968, Scania launched the 110 in the UK. Drivers loved it. Fleet operators loved it. British manufacturers panicked. This is the story of how one Swedish truck destroyed an entire industry. The British truck industry in 1968. The British truck industry was confident in 1968. ERF Atkinson, Foden, AEC Leyland, Guy, Seddon. These manufacturers had built Britain's roads for decades. They knew what British operators wanted: cheap to run, reliable, simple to fix. British trucks were tough. Gardner engines ran forever. AEC engines were powerful. Leyland had the biggest dealer network. Nobody questioned British superiority. The typical British truck in 1968 was a workhorse, cramped cab, basic seats, minimal soundproofing. Drivers sat on thin cushions. The heater barely worked. The windscreen wipers struggled in rain. But nobody complained. This was trucking. You drove. You delivered. You went home. Comfort didn't matter. Or so the manufacturers thought. British trucks had one big advantage. They were built for British roads. Narrow lanes, tight loading bays, low bridges. British trucks fit perfectly. Foreign trucks seemed too big, too wide, too European. The British truck market was protected. Import duties made foreign trucks expensive. UK weight limits favoured British designs. The 32-ton maximum gross weight meant British manufacturers could build lighter trucks with smaller engines. Most British trucks ran between 150 and 220 horsepower. That was enough. Roads were slow, motorways were new, nobody needed more power, or so they claimed. Driver turnover was high. Drivers quit after a few years. The work was hard. The trucks were uncomfortable, but there were always new drivers. The manufacturers didn't worry. Then Scania arrived. Scania enters the UK market. Scania officially formed Scania UK on December 14th, 1964. But the company took time to establish dealers, build service networks, train mechanics. By 1968, they were ready to launch properly. In February 1968, Scania rebranded. They dropped Vabis from the name, new logo, new model designations. The Scania Vabis LB76 became the Scania LB 110. The number indicated engine displacement, 11 litres. The Scania 110 arrived with an 11-litre diesel engine, power outputs from 210 to 260 horsepower. This was more power than most British trucks, but power wasn't the main selling point. The cab was the revolution. Scania's LB series cab was spacious, wide, tall. Drivers could stand up inside, not crouch, not bend, stand up properly. The seats were proper truck seats, adjustable, comfortable, designed for all-day driving. The sleeper cab was even better. A proper bed, not a shelf behind the seats. A real bed where you could sleep properly. Curtains, storage compartments, space to move around. British drivers who test drove Scanias couldn't believe it. This was what a truck should be. This was civilised. This was professional. The Scania had soundproofing, real soundproofing. The engine noise was muffled. Road noise was reduced. You could have a conversation at motorway speeds. In a British truck, you shouted. The heating worked. Hot air actually came out. Warm air that heated the cab properly. In winter, this mattered. British truck heaters were pathetic. The controls made sense. Everything was within reach. The dashboard was logical. The gear lever fell naturally to hand. The steering was light. After driving a British truck, a Scania felt modern, but the biggest difference was build quality. Everything in a Scania fit properly. Doors closed with a solid thunk. No rattles, no vibrations. Panel gaps were even. Paint was thick and glossy. This was engineering. This was quality. British manufacturers dismissed it. Too expensive, they said. British drivers don't need luxury. They need reliable trucks that do the job. They were wrong. The driver shortage crisis. By the early 1970s, Britain faced a driver shortage. Drivers were quitting. The work was hard. The pay was average. The trucks were terrible. Why would anyone stay? Companies struggled to find drivers. Recruitment was expensive. Training was expensive. Losing drivers was killing profits. Then fleet operators discovered something interesting. Companies with Scanias didn't have driver problems. Companies with Volvos didn't have driver problems. Companies with Swedish trucks could recruit drivers easily, keep drivers longer. Drivers specifically asked for Swedish trucks. Word spread in transport cafes, in truck stops, among drivers. If you wanted a decent job, you looked for operators with Scanias or Volvos. If a company ran ERFs or Atkinsons, you avoided them. This changed everything. Fleet operators realised driver comfort mattered. Happy drivers stayed longer. Lower turnover meant lower costs. Better drivers meant fewer accidents, fewer insurance claims, higher productivity. Operators who bought Scanias found drivers came to them. Drivers who owned their trucks bought Scanias and had no trouble finding work. The Swedish trucks paid for themselves through reduced driver costs. British manufacturers noticed. They tried to respond, but they were too slow. British manufacturers struggled to respond. British manufacturers faced a problem. They had invested heavily in their current designs. New cabs cost millions to develop. They couldn't just copy Scania. That would take years, cost fortunes. Instead, they tried small improvements. Better seats, improved heaters, more soundproofing. But these were patches, not solutions. Leyland launched the ergomatic cab in 1964. It was better than older designs, but still cramped compared to Scandinavian trucks. Still noisy, still basic. AEC tried to compete with power. They developed the V8 400 engine, potential 400 horsepower, but they rushed it. The engine was unreliable. Major failures under 60,000 miles. Leyland axed the V8 almost immediately. ERF, Atkinson and Foden stuck with Gardner engines. Reliable. Proven, but underpowered. And the cabs couldn't match Scania comfort. The British manufacturers made another mistake. They focused on fleet managers, not drivers. They sold trucks based on purchase price, fuel economy, maintenance costs, all the things accountants cared about. Scania sold trucks to drivers, comfort, power, quality, all the things drivers cared about. And when drivers insisted on Scanias, fleet managers had to listen. By the mid-1970s, Scania and Volvo were taking serious market share. British manufacturers were bleeding. The oil crisis hurt. The recession hurt. But Swedish competition hurt most. The Scania 111 dominates. In 1976, Scania upgraded the 110 to the 111. More power, better fuel economy, improved reliability. The 111 became the most desired truck in Britain. The LB 111 came with power options from 255 to 305 horsepower. This was massive for the time. British trucks were still struggling to reach 220 horsepower. The Scania had 305. On motorways, the Scania 111 cruised at speeds British trucks couldn't match. It pulled hills that left British trucks struggling. It carried maximum loads with power to spare. Operators running long distance to Europe needed Scanias. British trucks couldn't compete on the continent. They were too slow, too uncomfortable for multi-day trips. Scania 111S dominated European routes. The 111 also had reliability. Swedish engineering meant fewer breakdowns, better parts availability, dealers who understood the trucks. British manufacturers had patchy dealer networks, inconsistent service, parts delays. By the late 1970s, the Scania 111 was the truck British drivers demanded. If you wanted good drivers, you bought Scanias. Simple as that. One operator in a trucking forum called the Scania 111 the finest import to ever land in the UK. He owned several. Operated them for years. Never regretted it. British manufacturers tried to fight back. Ford launched the Transcontinental in 1973. Built in Amsterdam with a Berliet cab and Cummins engines. It was competitive, but it was still Ford, still not quite Scania quality. Leyland developed the T45 road train, launched in 1980, better cab, more power. But by then it was too late. Drivers had made their choice. Scania and Volvo had won, the V8 legend. Scania had one more weapon, the V8 engine. In 1969, Scania unveiled its 14-litre V8 diesel engine, 350 horsepower, Europe's most powerful truck engine. It held that title for years. The Scania 140 and later 141 models with the V8 became legends. The sound, the power, the performance. Nothing British could match it. The V8 made Scania the king of the road. This was marketing genius. But it was also true. V8 Scanias dominated heavy haulage, dominated long-distance work, dominated anywhere you needed maximum power. The collapse of British manufacturers. By the 1980s, the damage was terminal. AEC closed in 1979. The Southall factory shut on May 25th, 1979. Gone. Decades of British truck building ended. Leyland had killed AEC through mismanagement and the failed V8 engine. Guy closed in 1982, merged into Leyland. The Guy name disappeared. Another British manufacturer dead. Atkinson struggled through the 1970s. Seddon Atkinson formed in 1974. But they couldn't compete with Scania quality. The company eventually became part of Iveco. The Atkinson name died. ERF fought on. But even ERF struggled. Their trucks were seen as gaffers' trucks, cheap, reliable, but lacking the prestige of Scania or Volvo. ERF survived into the 1990s, but never recovered their old position. Foden survived by going upmarket, specialised trucks, American components. But Foden was small, niche, not a volume manufacturer anymore. Leyland became a disaster, corporate chaos, poor management, failed mergers. The T45 road train was good, but came too late. DAF bought Leyland in 1987, closed factories, eliminated redundancies. By 1988, British truck manufacturing was effectively dead. Some brands survived as badges, but the industry, gone, destroyed. And Scania, still growing, still expanding, still building trucks British drivers wanted. Why Scania won. Scania understood something British manufacturers didn't. Drivers matter. British manufacturers built trucks for fleet managers, for accountants, for people who never drove them. They focused on purchase price, maintenance costs, fuel economy, all important, but not enough. Scania built trucks for drivers, comfort, power, quality, space, heating, soundproofing, all the things that made driving pleasant instead of punishment. When drivers had a choice, they chose Scania. When drivers had no choice, they quit. This forced fleet managers to buy Scanias. Driver retention became more valuable than low purchase prices. Scania invested in dealer networks, proper training, parts availability, service standards. Scania engines, gearboxes and axles were designed together. Everything matched. Everything worked together. Scania also had timing. They entered the UK market just as weight limits were increasing, just as motorways were expanding, just as European routes were growing. British manufacturers were stuck in the past. Scania was ready for the future, the legacy. Today, Scania dominates British roads. Walk into any truck stop, count the badges. Scania, Volvo, DAF, Mercedes. A few British heritage restorations, but modern British truck manufacturing? Dead. The British truck industry employed tens of thousands. Skilled workers, engineers, designers, all gone. Factories closed, skills lost, communities destroyed. Could British manufacturers have competed? Maybe. If they'd invested in driver comfort sooner, if they'd understood that trucks needed to be pleasant to drive, if they'd matched Scania quality. But they didn't. They were arrogant, complacent. They thought British drivers would accept anything. They thought loyalty to British brands mattered more than comfort. They were wrong. The Scania 110 and 111 proved that drivers had standards. That comfort mattered. That quality mattered. That power mattered. The Scania 110 arrived in 1968. By 1988, British truck manufacturing was finished. 20 years. That's all it took for one Swedish truck to destroy an entire industry. The story of Scania versus British trucks isn't about nationalism. It's about what happens when you ignore your customers. Today, Scania is stronger than ever. Still building trucks drivers want. Still focusing on quality. Still dominating markets worldwide. And British truck manufacturing, a memory, a historical curiosity, a cautionary tale about what happens when you ignore the people who matter most. The Scania 110 didn't just compete with British trucks, it humiliated them, exposed their weaknesses, destroyed their market, and changed trucking forever. That's how one Swedish truck killed an entire British industry.